Welcome back to Mike Tries YouTube. When I first began this channel, YouTube felt like a place where I watched other people's content. I came here to learn new things, to be entertained, and see what other creators were doing. But now that I've created a few videos on my own and gotten comfortable filming, editing, and publishing them, I've started to look at YouTube and even my own daily life a little differently. First, let's talk about how my perspective on YouTube has changed. It started to become my favorite social media platform. I still use Facebook and Instagram for quick updates, memes, pictures, and short posts. But YouTube has become the place where I can share what's really going on in my life in a much more complete way. I can share what I'm working on, what I'm learning, what's going well, what's not going so well, and bring people along as I figure this whole thing out. I also started watching YouTube differently. I'm paying attention to the production, the editing, the storytelling, what makes videos interesting to large audiences, and the different ways creators connect with their viewers. I'm constantly taking notes about and thinking about how I can apply those ideas to my own videos. As I've gotten more comfortable posting videos, I'm also starting to see everyday life differently. Things that used to be ordinary chores or projects are now things I might film because they could be helpful, entertaining, or educational to someone else. When in doubt, I film it. Then I decide later whether or not it's worth editing and sharing. You never know what someone else might find interesting or helpful. One new thing I'm trying this week is using my iPad as a free teleprompter. I'm still experimenting with it, but the goal isn't to make my videos sound scripted. It's to help me stay focused on the story I'm trying to tell. I'll explain a little later why I decided to make that change, but so far I'm really excited to see how it works out. So if this episode feels a little cleaner or more structured, that's part of what I'm trying this week. In this episode, I'm going to share a small weekly win that perfectly illustrates how my perspective is changing, talk about a creator who's influencing the way I think about making videos, share one of the biggest lessons I've learned after watching my first couple episodes back, and show you the editing workflow I'm using in DaVinci Resolve to keep these episodes organized. Let's jump into this week's weekly win. One thing that I want this weekly win segment to remind me, and hopefully remind you, is that not every win has to be life-changing. Sometimes the biggest victory is finally getting around to something you've just been putting off. This week, that was taking apart my sectional and giving underneath it a really good cleaning. It's the first time I've done it since I moved in. As I was cleaning, I found a couple of things I hadn't seen in a long time, including one of Phoenix's old teething sticks hidden underneath of it. For those who didn't know, Phoenix was my dog. I had to say goodbye to him about a year ago, so finding that little teething stick was one of those unexpected reminders that just made me smile. By the time I finished, the room looked better, it felt better, and honestly, I felt better. A few months ago, this would have just been another chore that nobody would ever see. But as I mentioned, now that I'm creating videos to share, I'm starting to look at everyday projects differently. I've watched people pressure wash driveways, mow lawns, organize garages, and deep clean their homes on YouTube. There's something satisfying about watching someone finish a project and seeing the difference it made. Maybe that's because we all know what it feels like to finally cross something off the list. That's really what this weekly win is all about, celebrating the little victories that make life just a little bit better. Because those small wins deserve celebrating too. So now that we've celebrated our small weekly win, let's move into this week's weekly watch. And this week's watch is Marques Brownlee, better known as MKBHD. I've been watching Marques for years because I've always been into technology. I've worked in home theater installation for 7 years, I was a reluctant Apple user for many years, and I love everything tech related. Whether it's a new iPhone, headphones, computers, cameras, or the latest Apple features, his channel has always been one of the resources I trust before making a purchase. But lately, I've been watching his videos for a different reason. Instead of paying attention to the products, I'm paying attention to how he creates his videos. Today, his channel has over 21 million subscribers, and it's not unusual for a new video to reach 1 million viewers in its first day. That's pretty incredible, but I don't think people keep coming back just because he's reviewing the latest gadgets. I think they come back because they trust him. He's organized, he stays on topic, he shares his real-world experiences, and he delivers exactly what he promises at the beginning of the video. That's something I'm trying to learn as I continue this YouTube journey. I'm not trying to build a channel that's mostly technology-focused like MKBHD, but if I can build the same kind of trust that Marques has built with his audience, I'd consider that a huge success. Mike Tries YouTube is about trying new things, sharing what I'm learning, and bringing you along on the journey. When I recommend a product or share a tool tip, I want it to be something I've actually used, something that's made a difference for me, and something I generally think is worth sharing. Watching creators like Marques has really made me look at my own videos differently. And that's actually what I want to talk about in this week's Journey Update. One thing I've learned after posting my first couple of episodes is that making a video and telling a story are two completely different skills. When I sat down to film episode 2, I had a plan. I knew what I wanted to talk about, but when I watched it back during editing, I realized something. I'd introduce a topic, then I'd drift into another idea, then another, and then sometimes never come back to the original point. The funny thing is, I never noticed it while I was filming. When I'm sitting here talking to the camera, it feels like a conversation, and everything makes sense in my head. It wasn't until I was editing the episode and watching those same clips over and over that I started asking myself, how did I get from talking about this to talking about that? The content wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't always the story I promised at the beginning of the segment. Watching creators like Marques Brownlee has made me realize that one of the reasons his videos work so well is because he stays focused. He tells you what he's going to talk about, then he talks about it. Simple. That sounds easy, but it's actually a skill I'm still learning. So moving ahead, I'm changing the way I create these episodes. Instead of filming one long conversation, I'm breaking the episode into individual segments. Each segment has one main purpose and one message. I can still have a few examples or stories that support the message, but they all need to point in the same direction. That realization is what sent me looking for a teleprompter and a better way to stay on track while I was filming. I found a way to use my iPad as a free teleprompter, and after I've had a chance to use it for a few episodes, I'll probably do a dedicated tooltip showing exactly how I've set it up, the process to use it, and whether I recommend it or not. Hopefully, that'll make these videos easier to follow, and it'll definitely make them easier to edit. But if I tell you we're going to talk about one thing, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned so far in this YouTube journey. And speaking of making the editing processes easier, let me show you the workflow I've started using in DaVinci Resolve in this week's tooltip. So this week's tooltip is a little different. It's not really about DaVinci Resolve itself. It's about the workflow I've started using inside DaVinci Resolve that's helping me stay organized and making these episodes much easier to edit. Now, I'm definitely not a DaVinci expert. I'm learning something new every week, and I'm sure my workflow will continue to evolve. But instead of starting from scratch every time I've made a new episode, I've built a repeatable process that keeps every segment organized. Let me show you how I build an episode. The first thing I do is create a new project. Then I make sure I'm in the media pool before creating my first timeline. I call that timeline template. Before I do anything else, I change the timeline start time from 1 hour to 0. I finally looked up why it starts at an hour, and it's actually left over from the days of editing physical film. It makes sense, but my OCD doesn't do well with it. So 0 it is. Once the template is finished, I never build another timeline from scratch. Instead, I simply duplicate it. The first duplicate becomes my episode 3 master timeline. Then I duplicate it again for each section of the episode. Weekly win, weekly watch, our journey update, the tooltip, our weekly why, and outtakes. Breaking the episode into smaller timelines lets me focus on one story at a time instead of trying to edit a 15-20 minute video all at once. It also means every segment is already organized if I want to turn them into its own video or short later. Instead of searching through one giant timeline, everything is already broken out and ready to go. It's saving me time now, and I think it's going to save me a lot of time down the road. As I'm editing, if I make a funny mistake or know a clip belongs in the bloopers, I immediately move it to my outtakes timeline. That way, by the time the episode is finished, the bloopers are already organized. When a segment is complete, I simply select everything, copy it, jump to the end of my master timeline, and paste it in with a few quick keystrokes. Home, Control-A, Control-C, switch timelines, end, Control-V. Done. On to the next segment. By the end, all of those individual pieces become one complete episode. It's a simple workflow, but it's made editing feel much less overwhelming. I'm sure this workflow will continue to evolve as I learn more about DaVinci Resolve, but right now it's helping me spend less time trying to stay organized and more time actually creating videos. If you've got a favorite DaVinci shortcut or workflow that saves you time, let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn from you also. Alright, and let's wrap this up with our weekly why. One thing I've been thinking about this week is consistency. When I started this channel, I thought I'd probably be able to put out one episode every week. The reality is, it's taken me closer to 3 weeks for each episode. At first, that was a little frustrating. Then I realized something. I'm not just creating videos, I'm building a process. Every episode teaches me something that makes the next one a little bit easier. This week, it's organizing my filming. It's staying on topic. It's creating a better editing workflow. Those aren't just improvements for episode 3, they're investments in episode 10, 50, and hopefully episode 100. So my why this week is simple. I'm not chasing perfection, I'm building consistency. If I can just make the process better every week, the videos will naturally get better too. And that's what keeps me excited to keep creating. Thanks for coming along on the journey. We'll see you again soon, hopefully next week. And don't forget to remember your why and celebrate your wins. It's because... And bring people along as I figure out this whole thing. When in doubt, I film it. Then I decide later I can share what I'm working on, what I'm learning, what's going well, what's not going so well, and bring people along as I figure this whole thing out. And show you how the editing workflow I'm using in DaVinci Resolve to keep these... And speaking of making the editing process easier, let me show you the workflow I've started using in DaVinci Resolve. It's to help me stay focused and on... But lately I've been watching his video and bringing you along on the journey. But when I watched it back during editing, I found a way to use my iPad as a free teleprompter, and after the context wasn't necessarily bad. The content wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't always the story I promised at the beginning of the segment. And I'm sure my workflow will continue to evolve. Let me show you how I've built an episode. The teleprompter made a much shorter, cleaner episode, so if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.